Very, very nice, breezy evening. My first time in Calicut, and I'm so happy to see such a great crowd. So thank you for coming for our session. We will straight away dive into talking with our panelists, Vivek and Anita. And after some discussion, I'll also open the floor for questions. So please keep your questions ready. We'll come to you in a bit. But we'll begin our session now. What determines fiction in the 21st century? So Vivek, we've seen fiction evolve, over decades. And post-independence, there have been different voices. There are different techniques and visuals that writers have used to tell their story. How do you see the changes that have come in novel writing?
I think one of the differences, see, 21st century, though we say what determines fiction in 21st century, I really don't want to draw a line and say, look, this is what has happened in 21st century, because it is very difficult to say. For some of us, the century has started 10 years ago. For some of us, it might have started 10 years later. But the point I'm trying to make is, what are the changes that have happened in the recent past which impacts writing? I mean, I see it from my point of view because each writer has her or his own journey, and where do I stand and where do I look at it, rather than talking about fiction or literature in general. Having said that, I think one of the most important aspects of fiction writing is to capture experience, and the challenge now is, what is this experience? How has it changed in the last few years, say 2.5 decades? More importantly, because when you try to convey an experience through fiction, it is necessary to take the reader along with you. It means that you need to prepare the reader, as well as you need to understand the reader as well, because only when there is this connection that it is possible for us to say subtle things and talk we don't have to scream, talk in a voice which is like how we speak with friends. So for that, it is necessary to have this clarity and connection at both ends. And I feel that in the last 20-25 years, what we call experience itself has changed. Whether you take it information, the way information is available to us, because many times in the past when we got information through fiction, like for example, the Czech invasion of Russia, so much was we came to know through writings of Milan Kundera. Similarly, there are so many examples I can give from Indian writing as well. So what is an experience has changed. So one is the visuals, what we could not imagine. We can see whatever you think of, you can see it on the screen today. So it does certain things to our perception and our understanding of experience. Similarly, on information, it does something to the way we read and experience and imagine an experience. So whether it is internet, whether it is YouTube and other things, whether it is Chat GPT, whether it is metaverse, whatever you call, the way the experience comes to us has changed. And I think it is a huge challenge for a writer. I'm not talking about the marketing jargons which talk about the recall value, the attention span. I'm not talking about that. The writer requires a reader to engage in a different manner. In some of the writers, I think it is Italo Calvino, in one of his novels, I think it was If on a Winter's Night, the first page starts off saying, what does he expect the reader to be? He says, come, sit here, sit on a chair, relax, take the book, take it. There is a certain kind of a preparation required. At the same time, the author also engages the reader in a particular way to read a specific fiction. For example, in Kafka's Metamorphosis, the opening sentence, if you accept it, the rest of the novel is fantastic. Right? When Gregor Samsa, he finds himself into a gigantic insects in the morning. So there is a way you prepare the reader to accept what you are saying in your work, in your novel. So I feel that in the last, when we talk about 21st century, these are the big changes that have happened in relationship between the writer and a reader. So there are very many challenges in this. We'll talk about it, but I think to respond to your question, I thought this would be good start.
No, absolutely. I think writing and the experience, as you mentioned, has changed over decades, and that, of course, is reflected in our stories and writing. Um, Anita, what do you think about it? How has novels, in your view, evolved over the decades?
Okay, first of all, hello, Calicut. It's been a long time since I've been here. So, I think one of the things that's of importance for me is that if you look at, I mean, I studied English literature, so I can't help not mention this, but in the beginning, if you were to look just back 100 years now, you would find that, so I was talking about how 100 years ago, if you were to start looking at it, there was a predominant classist element to the way literature was written, the way it was, the language used, the lifestyles, as Vivek said, the experiences that were, written about and so on. But probably from the 1960s onwards, you'd find how the writing changed, where the subjects were about everyday people and everyday things, and it became more, and there was no, I think in many ways fiction became like a class leveler, where anybody who could write well was able to write about their personal experience. So it could be Alan Sillitoe writing about working class England. It could be John Osborne writing about working class England, etc. Or it could be Steinbeck, a more familiar name probably, writing about the world that he knew and so on. There wasn't aspirational elements that came into the writing, but more about sharing experiences. And I think in the last probably, let's say, 2.5 decades, the change that you see in writing fiction is, I think, immeasurable, because the way we lead our lives, everything, the impact of technology, and how people now travel so much further than they ever did, and so on. All that is kind of encapsulated in the kind of books that emerge. I'm not saying that every book is a travel book or whatever, but people are no longer afraid to, this whole thing about cultural appropriation, saying that you can only write about what you know. But I think that door has opened a little more, and there are people taking chances, writing about worlds that they are probably not very familiar with, but will put in their heart and soul into researching it and understanding that world and writing about it.
Thanks, Anita. Jerry, I'll come to you now. We talked about, shared experiences and, how it has evolved over decades. What do you think about that, and how has it sort of evolved in your writing as well, because you've written multiple novels?
Hello. Yeah, I think we are as a practitioner. I'm speaking as a practitioner. I'm speaking as someone who writes novels and is invested in the writing of novels and believes fundamentally that we write novels to understand each other. It is actually, I think yesterday someone was talking about gossip as the lowest level of writing, where you talk about somebody's sex life or their money life. And then there is literature. So the spectrum is from gossip to literature. And the novel will die when gossip dies. That's my experience of it. Now, as far as what you can write about or what you can't write about, as long as writing is a private act, you can write about anything. You can choose to do what you want with what you want. But right now we have a political space as well. Writing is a political act. We understand that. So therefore, if tomorrow I want to write about the Dalit world, for instance, I will probably be pulled up for Biafism. I will be pulled up for speaking, for cultural appropriation. Now, in each act, therefore, of novelistic imagination, there are two tensions. One is the tension, one is the impulse that I am free and my pen is free and I will write exactly what I want and my imagination will not be constrained. And on the other side, there is the responsibility that one has to marginal communities, to marginal voices, to sensitivity, to a community of readers that is not always all like you. So you've got to actually figure out a way in which to let this monster, creative monster, that wants to tell every story, that is greedy and believes in complete and total freedom. You've got to let that monster go out and in your first draft, and in your editing process, you bring in all the other things, that all the other gentler side which will constrain and hold down that monster's production. So I think the title of this talk is The Monster. It is far too large. The only way I can find to respond to it, to talk about the novel, is to talk about the novels that I write and my experience as a novel, as someone who has produced some novels. I think fundamentally, therefore, before this moment of democratization, of media democratization via social media, we got away with a lot more. You look at Mulk Raj Anand's Coolie, Mulk Raj Anand's Untouchable, obviously a very, very privileged person taking on the story of the underprivileged. How would that work today? How would that play today? I don't know. But it's part of our literary history. It won't be wished away. So we've got to sort of figure out our way forward, and each step is fraught.
Vivek, you wrote Ghajar Gochar, which has become I think, an iconic novel. We all have read it and loved it, and became even more popular when it was translated into English by Srinath Perur. How do you navigate, through, these changes, and how do you see, languages at play, in terms of the audience?
See, I write in Kannada, and I think in the last 2.5 decades in India, the Indian language writers share more than what they were sharing between themselves 2.5 or 3 decades ago. Our experiences earlier were confined to our languages largely. I'm not saying entirely, but largely. And then there was the for whatever reason, the political or other reasons, it was, one could point out and say, look, this is a very Malayalam story, very Kannada story, very Tamil story. And now I think that has probably we have come little away from that, because our experiences are so much the challenges are so much common. More than experience, the challenges are so much common, whether it is through globalization, whether it is through information, whether it is through democratization of certain things, the media, as Jerry talked about. So various things have impacted. So I see myself, when I write in Kannada, I see that these things, when I talk about my, with fellow writers from other Indian languages, I see that we share a lot of challenges in current times. Now, coming back to your question on translation and how it happens in between languages, I think my book, it is in various languages, some 20 different languages. But I feel that in every language, when you translate, including it's in Malayalam or in English, it is a book in Kannada, then it is another book in English. Though every sentence in Kannada is in English. Because as a writer, when I write, I have a certain way in which I want to invoke memories of the readers. And when you read the sentence in Kannada, the same sentence may not evoke the same memories in English. So it has to be different. So the challenge is different even if you have the same sentences in English. So one has the translation. I don't want to get into the translation business because it's another session. But the point I'm making is when me as a writer, for me, I can only write for my Kannada readers. If others can read and enjoy, I'm happy. But I cannot write for, assuming it will get translated into Malayalam or English or Tamil or whatever. It is not possible. The reason it is not possible is I have a relationship as a fiction writer with my language. And that relationship is very deep. And I don't have that relationship with English, which is why I don't write in English. Though I may speak English well, I may have, but at the time of writing fiction, I'll have to think when I write in English. At the time of writing Kannada, I put a word, the next word follows. I write a sentence, the next sentence. That flow is essential. That flow is what connects with your culture. The flow is what connects with your language. Which is why when I write a page sometimes, I'm surprised at what has come out, what I have written. And that surprise element is absolutely necessary to enjoy writing. And if there is no surprise, there is no magic in writing.
No, absolutely. I think we're waiting for your next novel. Just to give you guys a little preview, Vivek's new novel, Sakina's Kiss, will be published soon. So we're all waiting for it. Anita, I also wanted to ask you about how the women characters have evolved in novels, over decades. And you've written about women and relationships in your novels. So tell us a little bit about, how you dealt with it.
Okay, that's landmine territory. Because on the one hand, so much has changed in the lives of women. And on the other hand, nothing has changed. It's pretty much, you just have different phrases for the experiences. I know increasingly people like to talk about how this is an anti-patriarchal novel and, those kind of things. Words are used. But sometimes I think that women readers, in that sense, they understand that while so much has changed, nothing has really changed. And so when they read a book which has probably a central female protagonist, then they are looking to understand if the experience shared by the protagonist is the same as what they are going through. Because these are women who are probably financially independent, or all those things that we talk about, but probably when it comes to mindsets and cultural conditioning, etc., they still haven't been able to kind of completely free themselves of the yoke of what will the world say and how will the world react to what I've done. So I find that when I'm writing, now I've been writing for about 22 years now, and I realized that the female characters I wrote about when I started my journey as a writer, and the characters that I write about today, superficially there's a lot of difference. The language that they use, the kind of, awareness that they have, all that has changed. But the world that they are battling against, or the world that they are trying to contend with, has in many ways not changed at all. So what happens is that it is in some ways old wine and new bottles more than anything else.
Well, Jerry, at this point, I want to bring in, the difference in approach in fiction and non-fiction writing. And you write, both fiction and non-fiction. So how do you approach it, as a writer?
I approach it, any act of writing I approach in the same way. What does the form demand? Does the form demand fiction or non-fiction? What I am troubled about is the way publishers approach fiction and non-fiction. There is a fairly regular, constant, and very stupid kind of article which says the death of the novel. And it says that the novel is dead because, and then there is a long David Logian argument which is basically rubbish. The rubbish arises out of the fact that there is an understanding that the middle class and the privileged write novels, and since the middle class and the privileged have written enough novels, now it's over, now we can all go home and presumably write non-fiction. This is reflected by publishing houses which prefer non-fiction to fiction. All publishing houses prefer non-fiction to fiction, which is even more stupid and short-sighted. You think about any non-fiction book from the 19th century, and you've got to be Charles Darwin, writing the descent of the species to be remembered today. And even he is a paragraph in your textbooks. You are not going to buy Charles blinking Darwin and read the whole thing. But you are still going to be reading a lot of 19th century novels. You are still going to be reading a lot of early 20th century novels because they tell you about people. They don't tell you about ideas which are dying now. So when publishers tell me that non-fiction sells, I feel like telling them, are you really in the business to sell? Are you not in the business to create a human experience which we can all share? What are you here for? If you're only here to sell, then go make soap. I mean, soap needs to sell. Books need to be. Books need to be here. Novels need to be here. And this idea that non-fiction sells, that even this moves over to the newspapers and the magazines and you pick up the New York Review of Books, 7-page article on some idiot biography written about some American president who was really important according to this biography, and you're thinking, no one remembers this. This book will not be remembered in 10 years' time. Why are you wasting your time? And fiction is at the end. Oh yeah, they also wrote those novels and let's put them here. That's so short-sighted, so stupid, because history is made by novels. History is made by human beings. History is a story that needs to be told, and it needs to be broken down from that grand narrative into what people every day were doing. So Madame Bovary and War and Peace tell me more about France and Russia than any number of large, fat, doorstop biographies or history books. And it is time for us to recognize that the novel is your best shot at immortality. So if Penguin Random House wants to be remembered as the half-assed publisher who produced 500 best-selling non-fiction titles, sure guys, go give it a shot. Whereas the fiction will be remembered.
Well, the novel is clearly not dead because I have 3 writers, novelists here, and a lot of readers. And as far as Penguin is concerned, we continue to publish a lot of fiction every year, and we'll continue to do that. Vivek, I wanted to ask you also about the evolution of themes.
I want one day to file an RTI with all the publishers to show me the advances they give fiction writers and non-fiction writers to see whether they are putting their money where their mouth is. Because they don't pay fiction writers enough, let me tell you, to make a living. And they certainly overpay non-fiction writers, especially if they come with like an American degree in number theory from some Ivy League college, thereby replicating their own fantasies and their own hierarchies and their own notions of privilege.
Well, I think that is debatable because some of our biggest books, even last year, are novels. But that is for another time, and we'll discuss that more, Jerry. I'll move on to Vivek because, I wanted to bring in the evolution of themes in novels and how have you, encountered them in your writing.
See, for a writer, it is. Am I audible? Is it okay? Okay. For a writer, it's a very personal journey because there are 2 aspects to it. One is, we write, as I said some time back, there is a need to connect and there is a need to communicate. Yeah, communicate is not the best word, but anyway, there is a need to express. And then in that process, as we go along, there are so many things that make an impact on you. For example, when I was growing up, I grew up in a small coastal town in Karnataka, very small place, and one of the folk art forms of Karnataka is called Yakshagana. It is about the artist, the the players. It's an all night long performance, and people, they dress up. The costumes are that of some other time, and then there is a singer who sits at the back, and he is the one who takes the story forward. The importance of this is that the themes are taken from mythology, either Mahabharata or Ramayana largely, and then the dialogues are extempore, which means that every time when there is a different actor, there is a different conversation and different dialogues. So the story, if you see the same performance every day for 10 different days with 10 different people, or with the same people, it will give you a different experience, because the conversation is not rehearsed and it is extempore. And each one of these characters, they try to defeat the other, however, keeping in the overall, the context of the story in line. For example, in one of the things, the Sita refuses to go with Rama, but then ultimately she has to go. But then, so they use this to hold a moment and then, examine the life of these people. For example, in what comes to my mind immediately is the story about Karna, and there is this death of Karna after he is hit by Arjuna, and then he's about to die. How much time it takes for him to die. But in that performance, it takes 3 hours. He talks for 3 hours. So that has impacted me as a writer, because it tells you what is that point in which you have to hold to look at a life in a certain way. And if you hold that moment at some other point in time, then it will be different. So such kind of things are the ones that have impacted me, and also that have impacted the way I have my fiction has developed over a period of time. So when you say that, look, how do you develop the characters? I think it is very difficult, because I won't use the word development, because somehow I don't like that kind of word. But it is a kind of you go into the lives of these characters in a way, because we also as writers, we have seen, as we go along, we see different world, we see different arts, we also read. So the way we look at these things, the way we exhaust the possibilities are immense as writers. So that is one aspect. The other thing for me in writing is language, because as I go along, one thing I have realized is that in fiction, in art, anything that you write to convey a meaning is of a lesser art. You don't write to convey a meaning. If you write to convey a meaning in non-fiction. But in fiction, it is not to convey a meaning, which is why in poetry, it is very difficult to understand any good poem fully. I can give you a number of examples from my own language, where great poets, and we have still not understood them fully, and that is the strength of it, because the language is not used to convey a meaning. So and I also do go believe in approaching literature in this manner, and the strength of it comes, is what I said. Strength of it comes when you look at translations. A great line in Kannada looks very silly in translation into English. This is what I mean by conveying meaning. Because when you translate, you have no choice but to convey that meaning. Because especially in poetry, so there is this relationship with language for me as a writer, and I think that has played a very important role in development of characters, in the way I see the world, in the way I see the relationship between the characters in my novel. It is like you place a character, and then there is another character, and there's another character. That chemistry is so different, and all of us, all three of us who are here have faced this. How much of while we talk about the joy of writing and spontaneity, but then also there is a responsibility of editing. In the end, it is not that whatever comes to our mind we write. I mean, writing is a very very a lot of hard work. One has to work every day for hours and hours to make it happen. So there are 100 other things which come together in this. So yeah.
No, absolutely. I think that's really useful insight. Anita, you of course write poems, you write for children, you write for adults. And I wanted to ask you, how do you approach expression in language, when you're writing for adults or for children?
I don't think really there's a major difference except in the in the profanities that I would use in probably, I mean, when I'm writing for adults, I'd put in 4-letter words very happily. I wouldn't even think twice about it. But when I'm writing for children, for instance, I have to, ask myself, how do I say what I want to say without saying it the way it's usually said? So, for instance, if I want to use the F word, how do I use it without actually saying it, using the F word itself? So there is a bit of challenge there, but I think for me the greatest part or the greatest joy out of that I derive from writing for children is that it allows me to stop being this, this person that I am, and I just can kind of step into the skin of a 9-year-old. I just finished writing a children's book, so I step into the skin of a 9-year-old child, and then the world I view is that of the 9-year-old child. And so that makes a huge difference in the way I, evaluate even an simple experience like looking at a dragonfly. So how many of us here, grown-ups and so on, how many of us actually spend time looking at the shimmery wings of a dragonfly? Or how many of us take pleasure in eating a mango, biting through the skin and all of that. So all of these are experiences that we relegate to a kind of distant past once, we are adults. But for me, when I'm writing from a child's point of view, it allows me to take that step back into my own childhood and enjoy. So I think sometimes I love writing for children because I think sometimes I get very jaded, and obviously the adult world that I'm writing about is complex. It's filled with all kinds of not so nice emotions, and it churns me up horribly. But when I write from a child's perspective, it still allows me to derive wonder from the world around us. It allows me to find magic in the ordinary things and little things and so on. So it's for me a sacred part of my writing, what I write for children, because apart from that, it's also about, there is a certain responsibility that you have when you're writing for children, which is about making sure that you don't, push them into situations that are regressive, or how do they react? Like I know. So for instance, in Kerala, one of the films that's been very successful in recent times has been this film called Jai 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 Ho. And I was wondering why was it? And then it's this fantasy about this girl learning to, do karate from the YouTube and her getting away with it and being successful, etc. So in many ways, it's what a child would want to do. You'd think that, okay, let me watch a YouTube video and I can, on one hand, I can learn karate. On the other hand, I can make a paper plane. It doesn't matter. But the possibilities that exist when you're a child is wide, and it's so broad spectrum that I think sometimes when I feel weary of being an adult, when I write for a child, I feel much more optimistic and happier, actually.
Absolutely. I think it's a world of wonderment and imagination. And I have an 8-year-old daughter, so I'm going to read this with her, which is a children's novel. Jerry, you've interacted a lot with younger people and you've been teaching for more than 40 years. How has that, influenced you as a writer? And, you clearly enjoy it. Does it, you have an impact on how you write?
I have the feeling that most teachers are perverts of some kind, and they are power hungry and power mad. The reason why you become a teacher is because you can exercise the full power of your personality on a helpless bunch of people. So, yeah, thank you. You can clap louder also. So I don't take any pride in the fact that I taught for 40 years now. Looking back, I think it might have been a bad influence. I'm very glad this is my last year of teaching. I will go into detox now. I will be a powerless person. The problem, I think, also is that when you have taught long enough, you lose all sense of illusion about children. you know that they are as brutal, venal, corrupt, idiotic, foolish as you are. There is no difference between the two of you. And some of them, a small percentage, is striving towards being better. A small percentage. Your job is to help that small percentage actually try and get a little better while keeping the rest of the monsters at bay. Okay? Because the rest of the children can smell that need to get better on the children who want to and are going to do their best to stop them. They are going to savagely attack them as being nerds, as being different, as being X, Y, and Z. So 40 years of teaching, I feel nothing for children except for a child. Now you put a child in front of me and I can talk to that child and I can relate with that child and the child and I can have a conversation and I fall promptly in love with the child. I enjoy that child. But children as a rubric, yeah, come on. They are miniature human beings. And Saint Augustine of Hippo in the 4th century said, but for the frailness of limb, the child is as evil as the adult. Augustine and I, we are bros.
Will be a lot of parents here, I suppose, and some teachers too.
Oh my God, if I were a parent, I would probably have an even more jaded attitude. I believe a child is an instrument to make a parent a second-class citizen in his or her own life. But it is so well designed that you actually voluntarily give up first-class citizenship, and then you will say things like, I ring up a friend and I will say, Chal, let's go to Bali this weekend. I have tickets, and they say, no, yeah, I can't go. Chunnu has unit tests. And you say, Chunnu has unit tests. Let him fail the unit. They say, oh, what are you saying? Fail the unit tests. He will not get into medical college. You say, Chunnu is 4 years old. It is a long way to medical college. Jerry, don't talk like this, please. I have to go and teach him multiple fractions or something. And you just give up. Parents with children, different breed. So sorry. Apologies. Profuse sympathies. But I'll write for your kids.
Well, that's what we want, because we want to read your books. I'll open the floor for questions very soon, but before that, I did want to ask one last question to all my panelists, which is, Vivek, right now, there are new writers coming up, and we also have, seasoned writers like you all here. But is there any particular writer that, you find interesting?
I think in Benjamin, who writes in Malayalam, I find him very interesting. He is a different kind of a writer, and his Good Days is a fantastic book, which is an experience, which is the book is based in Middle East, which I don't think any writer had till then explored, and a wonderful book. It's really truly a wonderful book. The other writer is a Tamil writer, Jai Mohan, whose book has just been published in English. The first publication in English, a collection of stories, is also another writer that I enjoy a lot. And both these writers, I have not just read them in English, but also in my language, Kannada. And I must say that there is a lot of translation happening between Indian languages. So the people who can only read in English are unlucky to that extent, because I have read these people much before they appeared in English.
Wonderful. Anita?
These two names that came to my mind now, but there are a long list of new and good writers. No, they are not new, but good writers.
I run this mentorship program, so I constantly seeing the work of young writers, or when I say young writers, writers who don't have a long publishing history, for instance. So they could be, 65 years old, but they still are young writers for me. So I see, and in fact, I think Aleph brought out this book called Case of Indian Marvels, which is 40 writers under the age of 40, and what David or whom David Davida thinks is the future of Indian fiction. So I've been reading that, and there've been some outstanding pieces of writing in it. and some very mediocre pieces of writing. So I don't think there are names I can throw up at this point because there are so many new writers who appear on a daily basis. It's almost like every second person or everybody's writing a book. Fiction, non-fiction, poetry, children's book, metaverse, whatever. So, I mean, the names that I would throw up are probably the names that are books that I've enjoyed reading and the books that I keep in my library, two of whom sit on this dais. One is Jerry and the other is Vivek. Because once I read a book and I think about, will I read this book a second time? And if I know I'm not going to read it a second time, then, I either give it away or gift it to somebody. So, yeah, so I'll say Jerry and Vivek.
Well, safe choices.
I can see no writers. I can see nothing on the horizon because I do not trust the writer. I trust the book. I pick up the book and I smell it, I taste it, I bite it, I chew it, I read into it, I flip pages, I experience the book. If this is my book, I don't care whether the name on it is Benjamin, Vivek, Anita. It's my book, I will read it. So I'm not interested in the name of the writer. The name of the writer is not important. Having said that, there's this guy called Jerry Pinto who's rather good.
Well, with that, we'll open the floor for questions. So please raise your hands and we'll pass the mic around.
So as I'm really grateful to be listening to you guys, and I wanted to ask you about this pattern that I have observed in novels. So if you take 18th century novels, it deals with the society, but POV is like from a distant POV, like it is observing everything equally. Then you can see in Kafka's novel, it is a bit more individualistic POV. And then as you come nearing to 21st century, that POV is getting more individualistic and more and more. So I have this, there is this another question I wanted to ask is that, sir, you said that translation, meanings get lost and you cannot write for another language. But as a writer, you have a voice, and that I feel like that voice is not bound to any language. Like we all have this human language, which is common for all. So if if you write to a Kannada person, like it will like there is this common ground for all. So and that human voice doesn't have any language. So I felt like what are your thoughts on that?
Thank you. Would you like to take the translation question first, and then we'll come to...
As far as the POV goes and the fact that the individual, isn't that gorgeous? Isn't that wonderful? That, see, I think you can only have that omniscient observer on the top as long as you believe in God. Because God then makes everything visible. Who, if there is a, that old philosophical question, if a tree falls in the jungle, who hears the sound? Well, very clearly, God hears the sound. And that makes the tree in the jungle has made a sound. Now, we don't need to be bothered about whether trees in jungles actually make sounds. Who cares, right? And who cares about a huge oval? We want to know what you're thinking. We want to know what you're feeling. I want to know about you. So when you write your novel, I want to know about you. I don't want to know what God thinks about you. That he'll tell me in his good time, or she'll tell me in her good time, or they will tell me in their good times when I turn up there. But I'm just so delighted that the POV is fractured, is broken, it's individualistic, it's shifting, there are unreliable narrators. Work, man, we get to work with the book. Yeah?
Thank you. We'll move on to Vivek
Yeah.
for the translation.
I think your second question is very important. It's really... when I talked about translation, it is the tone that a translation must try to capture. And what is a tone? The tone is, to put it in a slightly simplistic way, it is like a camera which you place at a certain angle. And from that perspective, you see certain things, and more importantly, you don't see certain things. What you don't see is very important in a work. Because if you show everything, then there is no way you can engage with the work. And what you should not, what you don't see is where you engage yourself. So that tone is what you can capture in translation. But as I said, what memories you can evoke through a language is impossible in another language. For example, in Kannada, there is something about a 12th century line which every Kannadiga knows, which is somewhat to say that my limbs are the pillars and my head is the whatever of a temple. Now, the moment you say that line, it takes back to every Kannadiga. It takes back to the 12th century and the kind of revolution that happened at that point in time. But if you translate it, it is completely lost. And if you want to capture it in translation, you'll have to explain it. If you explain in fiction, then it is no more fiction. Which is why when I say why I can write only to a Kannada readers is because then I don't need to explain. Suppose if I start thinking that my novel will get translated into English at some point in time, and hence I'm writing in Kannada today, but it will be ultimately read by an English reader, I will start explaining things. The moment I start explaining, I have lost that magic. Because you don't explain. As I said, you don't write to convey a meaning. You work so hard to make it precise. You make it, as less words as possible. So that is the whole process of editing and focusing and work, and you just, you be one with the work. So coming back to your question, I think it's a very important question, but as I said, there is a difference between a tone and what a language can evoke.
But what you said also, just to add, what it did to me was this. His line, his Kannada line. This is the temple. This is the entry. This is the Garbhagriha. This is the steeple. That's the way the temple is. So his line, what you said about that common ground from which we all speak, is also true. But what he said about the fact that there is a specificity of language is also true. It's equally true. It is contending truths that we must negotiate. And if we insist on a single truth, we become fascistic, nasty, non-pluralistic, and you know where I'm going, right, with that?
All right, we'll move on to the next question.
At the back there, boy in the sun.
Thank you so much. Now, Vivek, you mentioned about your going back to or moving together with Yakshagana and the kind of temporality you experienced there. Now, in terms of bringing that to your writing, now that writing, you were asked about theme as well as technique. In what way you create a meditative temporality so that things could be meditated with. And my quick submission about translation is that there are also translations which are transcreations. And they also are equally journey with the specific and the universal and the cosmic. And my quick query to Anita is, now when you say that nothing has changed, but while everything remaining the same, what still has changed, like the battles, for example. Now, the very context of the battle, resources of the battle, have they changed? And finally, to Jerry, now you begin very quickly, you begin with, your kind of anxiety about fiction and non-fiction. And I wish to understand you because you are simultaneously engaged with fiction and non-fiction. Like Darwin, for example. Now, to understand non-fiction from a historical perspective is different from a contemporary perspective. My only submission is that anxiety needs to be rethought.
I don't want to get into a discussion on transcreation and translation because transcreation, in every language we have examples, whether it's a Kamba Ramayana or Ramcharitmanas or Tulsi Ramayana, because they have all been recreations, transcreations. But now the definition of translation is different than transcreation. You can transcreate a sentence so that it is, it does not affect the meaning of the original. You cannot rewrite or transcreate an entire work as it's your own. So there is a difference. So it's a long debate, and I'll stop here.
Okay, what has changed and what hasn't changed? Very quick example. For instance, when I was probably writing my first book, which was about 25 years ago, the kind of situations that I was creating for my characters, for instance, let's talk about a clandestine meeting. I might have them meeting, behind a boat, for instance, okay? But what hasn't changed is it's clandestine. I might have another couple. Now, again, maybe it's an act of adultery or whatever. It's something about it is illicit. So they might now meet in a coffee shop, which is away from the city. So why do they do that? They do that because they don't want to be discovered. They don't want the world hurling things at them. So there is this element of clandestine air to it. So that doesn't change, and how and the fear that they have that they will be found out, that doesn't change. So if you look at any experience, whether it's joy or guilt or sorrow or anger or whatever, what we do is, as times change, we are the context that we give it is very different, but the emotions are pretty much the same.
My answer is anxieties can't be rethought, they can be dealt with. I'll have to deal with my anxieties.
Next question, please.
Hello everyone, this is so daunting to be sitting in front of you, names which I see on our bookshelves. So I was just thinking of the thing that you were saying about last year. It was when I heard that about non-fiction is the most selling genre, and I was also surprised, like kind of worlds which you guys create. It is so beautiful that it used to be experienced, like what Mr. Shanbhag was saying. It is not about reaching an end or anything but experience. And to my question, I was thinking of M and the Big Home, and I was thinking that this book was somewhat released when I was into research and all, and I was not reading anything outside my research, and this book was small and I took to reading this. And usually when you when you usually think that you want to read something good, something which makes us feel better, and it's not usually mental health or anything which you read usually which makes us feel good. And I know my sister also, last time she was reading KLF Shafak, and she was saying that she was telling my daughter, how do you read this, it's so traumatic. But reading the M and the Big Home was not at all like that. When I was reading it, I was very much into the world. I was thinking, and towards, I was experiencing what the children were feeling, what the daughter and the son was feeling. And when she dies also, I was kind of feeling very sad. But even then, I could go through the whole thing and I could finish it. And I was feeling that the dialogue and all was feeling so real. And I was saying, how could you pull it off, But then so a few months ago, I think I heard you speak at Tata Literature Live. I thought I saw an Instagram reel and I saw how you spoke, and I thought, okay, so this is the person who's writing this, so that's why it's like that.
Thank you
And
so
this
much
was
for that.
fun.
Is there a question?
Yeah, I was thinking, how do you do that? Like Mr. Shanbhag was saying that you write something and then you edit and do all those things. But when you read your dialogues, it doesn't feel like it's actually labored on it. Is there an effort over there? Or is it just spontaneous?
Thank you. That's such a lovely thing to hear, because you do not get spontaneous sounding dialogue without doing a huge amount of work to make it sound spontaneous. You have to make it sound as though these are people talking to each other. And if you don't do that, then it will be, it will actually sound like the work. So what I think Vivek said, my belief is we are all writers, right? You've written a report, you've written a research, you've written a letter, you've written an email, you've written a text message this morning, you're a writer. But this kind of writer is a rewriter. We rewrite what we have to do. We edit. We are constantly dissatisfied. We chase the chimera of the perfect Vivek, the perfect Anita, the perfect Jerry, the chimera of the perfect line, the sinuous paragraph, the perfect chapter, the elegantly set novel, the disruptive novel, the broken down novel, whatever we want to do, we are chasing chimeras. And the chase is only in the editing. The production is just, wow, put it down, and put it all down. And then you deal with the rubbish that you've written. Okay, and you pull out of that something that you think might be worthy. And 80% of the time you have to abandon the pursuit because it was just rubbish.
I think Jerry has put it so well. I just want to add two more things to it. A writer is always his or her best critic. And if you don't understand this, you can't become a good writer. And which means that many times you need to deal with your text very ruthlessly, as Jerry said. So that is the first thing. Second is, when you start writing, there is many times there is a false start. After writing 50, 60, 100 pages, if you see that you have not entered the work in the right place, you must have the courage to discard it and start all over again, which is what he meant by hard work. There's enormous amount of work that goes in, maybe into a 100-page book. But these are the things, because you don't know till you travel some distance whether it is a right start or a false start. Yeah, so you are the best critic, and a writer knows whether the work is good or bad. Whoever says anything, whatever, the success, non-success, the writer knows in his journey, her journey, whether the book is good or not good.
Do we have time for one more question?
Otherwise, we'll
Yeah.
all be hanging out at the bookshop, and when you buy
Because
a
I
book,
see
you
so
get
many
to
eyes.
ask a question.
Yes, please go ahead. Quickly, yes.
Hi, Jerry's comments today reminded me of a novel by D.H. Lawrence, Why the Novel Matters, in which he was talking about why the novelist is superior to the saint, the philosopher, and the scientist. And I guess the reason he had to really write that even in his time was because to some degree he felt marginalized as a novelist.
What is your question?
My question is, has that really changed? So fiction in the 21st century, when we compare it to the 20th century, is it become better or worse in that sense?
My belief is that the Indian middle class has a deep belief that they can be improved by reading non-fiction. That if you read non-fiction, then if your parents find you reading a novel, they say, what you're reading novels. If they find you reading a economics textbook, then they say, yeah, you should be reading that. As if you remember anything you studied in college. What is the valency of calcium? Ha! Do you remember what the binomial theorem is? No! But do you remember a poem you studied in the 7th standard? I remember them in 3 languages. देवांस देण हे देवांस देण सोन्यात सताट्या लमोत्यांस दान ये कौन चला जाता है पथ पर नवयुग का नव संदेश लिए. And I wandered lonely as a cloud. These are poems that are part of my DNA.
Thank you so much.